I grew up in a Christian home, was raised Christian, was at church all the time, very involved in my youth group, very involved in Young Life growing up. When I went to college, I met Courtney and we started dating our junior year. We were going to be living close to each other, just thinking in the back of my mind, that girl Courtney's going to be living fairly close to you. Be careful. She's a tricky one. She's a little dangerous.
There was a guy across the hall in my dorm who was giving me some unwanted attention. And so I asked Mark if he would pretend to be my boyfriend so that this other guy would maybe leave me alone. And so Mark agreed, and we pretended to be dating.
And I was absolutely right. She was tricky and she was dangerous, and we had a great time.
So then we got married, and my expectation of what marriage should be like would have been a continuation of that fun and the adventure. I felt like I had married my best friend. I thought we had a really good marriage. I would run to Mark whenever I had a problem. I would run to him first. He was my go-to confidant, my best friend still. And so in that first year of marriage, when it became a little rocky, I couldn't understand why.
While I was in college, the other big thing in my life that took place at the time, besides meeting Court, was I had my first experience to pornography in a computer lab. I was told in high school that don't look at pornography, don't get messed up in pornography. It'll change the way you think. But I knew that wasn't going to happen to me. I was too Christian. I was too smart. I was me. It wouldn't happen to me. It happens to other people. It definitely doesn't happen to me. The analogy I use is with sports figures that they say when they're not practicing, they're visualizing. They're visualizing what they're going to do when they get in the game, so that when they get there, they don't think, they just react. And just that constant visualization prepares them to just react, and it programs them to act a certain way. What I realized is it's no different with pornography. You're visualizing yourself in those situations, and I spent hours and hours and years visualizing myself in those situations, and so when those situations left the computer screens and the fantasies that I had run through in my head began to play themselves out in real life, that's when my first affair took place. Before I knew it, I was having affairs. I had several affairs, several acts of adultery that all stemmed from that pornography use. And without starting with pornography, I never would have gotten to the affairs that started changing the direction of where my life was going.
Because Mark had always been so kind and so focused on helping others and so good, and he was the one who introduced me to God and to Jesus, and he seemed to be the one who knew right versus wrong, I never suspected anything except maybe an emotional affair.
Courtney, after a while, after years, began to get suspicious. She felt like something was going on that she didn't know about. And as much as I tried to hide it, things were getting more difficult and more difficult to control and to hide. Courtney, she knew something was wrong. She knew that the relationship there was not right. And so she accused me of having an emotional affair, and I flat out denied it. Lied to her face, turned everything on her, told her she was crazy, and an emotional affair didn't begin to describe what was going on. About a year later, after that had gone by, it was in August, early August evening. It was a warm night, and I went out for a run. And my iPod wasn't working; it was dead, and so I was kind of bummed about that because I always run with music when I'm by myself. And Courtney said, "Well, why don't you just go out and run and just pray?" my head, I thought, all right, well, sure, not expecting a whole lot to come out of this prayer, because my prayer life hadn't been all that great lately. So I went out and basically told God, I'm like, all right, look, I don't have a whole lot to say, but I don't have any music, so I'll be quiet and I'll listen to what you have to say. And I had said that prayer before and asked to hear something from him, and it had never really felt like I heard anything. But that night I heard something very, very clear, and that was, hey, it's time. You need to come clean. And in my head I thought, it may have actually even been audible. I said, no way. There's no way I'm coming clean. That would ruin everything. That's the dumbest idea I have ever heard.
Mark came back from a nighttime run, and he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, okay. And he said, I think that you were right. I think a year ago I had an emotional affair. And while I had suspected that, to hear him admit it was a sucker punch. And so I started to pursue some more information. I had questions. I wasn't sure I wanted the answers to these questions, but I felt like I had to ask them. And with each question, I was getting more and more information that left me shocked, until finally one day the big reveal happened.
I couldn't find a way to technically tell truths without telling the entire truth, which I had become so good at, because so much of what I had told her through the years were technical truths, but hiding so much at the same time. Things were starting to unravel, and I went into my office to get my computer so I could work from home the next day. And as I was driving into the office, Court called me on my cell phone, and she asked me the one question that I had hoped more than anything I would never hear. And she asked me, she's like, Mark, did you sleep with her? And I said no. I said, absolutely not. There's no way that ever happened. And I hung up the phone and threw it against the floorboards and just screamed for the 15 minutes into my office. Got to my office, and what should have been a 5 minutes, go in, grab the laptop, walk out, turned into about 60 minutes of me pacing around the office, sitting in my office chair in the fetal position, just rocking back and forth, trying to figure out, pleading and begging with God, how is there any other option? Is there any way out of this situation? And the big point was, at the end, I really just told God, I said, you know what, there isn't anything in me that doesn't think that you can't cure world hunger. You can't bring world peace. You can't solve cancer. You can't heal the sick. I don't think you can do this. You're not big enough to handle what I'm about to do. I knew I had painted myself into a corner, and that everything that I had done was going to start coming out the next day, and that I was going to have to tell Courtney what I had done. And I knew that when I told her the truth, my life as I knew it would be over.
And I remember exactly the moment. I don't think it will ever leave my memory. We were sitting on the floor, and he just flat out told me. And to describe the feeling, I don't think there are words to describe it. I face planted into a pillow and just screamed at the top of my lungs. I just screamed as loud and as loud as I could to get all the emotion out, because it was so painful to stay in. This was a man that I didn't think it could ever do any wrong. And he just admitted to the worst possible wrong a wife could ever imagine.
That day started really a 9-day process of telling her everything that I had been hiding from her for the last 15 years. All the affairs, all the pornography, all the secrets, all the lies. I had to stop denying it myself. I had to believe, yeah, this was really you. This you did all this stuff. So I had to admit it to myself. I had to admit it to her. God already knew, but I had to admit it to him too.
With each escalation, I had no idea, and I was left thinking, how could I not know? With each answer, my world collapsed a little bit more.
One person that I hid all this from so that she wouldn't get hurt, I had crushed, I had destroyed. The marriage that we both thought we had was gone. I had blown it up from the very core of what marriage is supposed to be.
With each passing day, I felt like I needed a little more information, and so while the whole inside of me screamed, kick him out, there was a small part of me that kept saying, just wait. And so on day 3 of these horrible 9 days of revelations, I felt God speak to me directly while I was in my bed one night, and I felt like he said, don't leave yet. And at that moment, I decided to trust God with the most important thing in my life. It was almost like a wave of relief washed over me. It didn't take away any of my shock or anger or just nausea, but it was direction. It was, I'm giving you this choice. You have this choice. You can leave, but I'm asking you, don't leave yet. Because he broke his vows, but I didn't have to break mine. There's just no way that we could do this on our own. This is a miracle. And with each passing month, I realized that I have lots of choices here. God originally gave me the choice of do not leave yet. And I chose to stick it out to see what God was going to do.
It was the night after another bit of information came out, and I was in a pretty dark place at this time, and there was something in the pit of my stomach that was just eating at me. So throughout the day, I just took my journal out, my pen out, and tried to figure out, what is this thing in my stomach? What is this message that's trying to come through? And finally, by the end of the day, I had a sentence written out that was exactly what it was supposed to, exactly what that feeling in my gut was. And it said, there's so much more that I am. And I felt like it was my first message from God since that August run that told me it's time to come clean. And it was this message from him to say, you know what, you're still a husband, you're still a father, you're still a friend. This is not everything that you are. The fear that I had in my office that night was 100% right. My life as I knew it ended. And luckily, God's plan was so much bigger than what I thought life was about.
We're all going to make mistakes. The people who love us the most are going to make mistakes. They're going to hurt us. And there's a God out there who is not going to do that. There's a God out there who loves us and is perfect and is always good and won't make mistakes. And that we need to run to him and we need to lean on him above anyone else. And if it wasn't for this specific tragedy, I would not have learned that. And so for that, I am so grateful.
The real message is, you told me in your office that I wasn't big enough, that I couldn't handle this. well, look where you are now. You're still married, you still have your kids, you still have your job. And Mark, there's so much more that I am. You haven't even scratched the surface of what I can do, of how big I am, how much I love you, of what I will do for you if you just follow what I say and trust me.
I look at Mark and I see the guy that I wanted to marry. I see the guy that God created. I know the man that he was created to be. I see boldness and courage, and we are having fun again, and we are laughing again, and we know that it could not have happened without God, and this is truly a miracle.
So would you guys join me in giving the Donelsons a hand for being so good? So Mark and Courtney, I love that they kind of share this story. I think if you were like me, you may have had the same reaction the first time you heard it, and it's just kind of, I was a little shocked by their vulnerability. And I think it's because, I think vulnerability is shocking because we don't see it much. I think vulnerability is a hard quality that we're not used to. We're so good at building up walls, and being vulnerable is hard. But I think being vulnerable is the path to growth, right? That I don't know if you can grow without being vulnerable. And so I'm inspired by how Mark and Courtney have been vulnerable, have been authentic. But like Courtney, would you kind of talk us through like why share the story? Why be so vulnerable?
Well, very early on, I felt like God was speaking to me, saying, you know, you're going to share this story with a lot of people. And the reason is, I think I go back to two places that are really important to me in the Bible, and one is 2 Corinthians 4, which says that we're all just fragile clay jars, and it's God's light shining through the cracks in our jars that can speak to other people, because we all have stories. This is our story. It's not one we would have chosen, but we all have stories. You do too. And so it just allows us to let God's truth and light shine through. So.
Great. So Mark and Courtney, how long have you guys been coming to Venture?
Since May.
All right. And so
nice to know you.
Hey guys. So I've known Mark and Courtney for a little while. They have two adorable adopted children who are just amazing. You may have met them before. I also want to introduce you to Dave. Everyone give Dave a hand. Dave Lewis. Yeah. So some of you know Dave. When we think about marriage ministry here, we go to Dave. Dave is one of our strategic partners we have at Venture, but also we consider Dave off-site staff because when we do marriage ministry, you know, Dave is kind of our hub. And so when someone comes to us with marriage crisis or whatnot, we usually either send them to a retreat with Dave, or we send them to a couple that has been trained by Dave. And so Dave is kind of like, you know, we've been walking with Dave for a few years now about like how do we minister, you know, to marriages and married people better. And so Dave, tell us a little bit about this organization you have, the basic idea, kind of where we can find out more about that.
Okay. My wife Carol and I have been married for 43 years, and about the middle of that, about 20 years in, we had our crisis, and we thought we knew what marriage was, and all that stuff started going downhill in that middle passage for a lot of reasons, which we won't go into. But out of that mess, God created a message, and we began to do marriage ministry in churches where we were on staff. And then about 5 years ago, we left a church staff on we believe, a direct call from God. The word that He gave us was that He wanted us to do marriage ministry only, pretty exclusively, and then He wanted us to help churches start marriage ministries, not just work with couples in trouble, but He wanted us to start top down. And that was a different approach because we started working with pastors and pastors' wives and denominational leaders and so forth, because we found out that a lot of those guys and gals don't have any help. They're just kind of out there, and they're in a huge, very influential role. And then He said something also very strange at the first, but also very important. He said He wanted His cities back. Now, that resonated with me, and we kind of figured out what that meant. And so when David Henderson and I got together in Mindy a few years ago, and David, one of the things that he was talking about was he wanted to take the city of Harrisburg for Jesus. And so that kind of connected our hearts. So we launched in 2010 in this faith ministry to help marriages get stronger, but also to see God maybe prevent some of the damage that we do to each other because we don't have the mentoring and we don't have the training, and then to launch marriage ministries in as many churches as God will let us do before it comes back.
Awesome. So we actually just sent quite a few couples to retreat with Dave to be mentored by Dave so they can mentor others. The Donelsons were one of those couples, and I'm telling you, like, you know, if your marriage is in like kind of a crisis, like you want a couple like the Donelsons kind of around you, right? And so we've kind of been through it. And like, hey, let's talk about this. And so we're excited where this is going next. David's going to talk a little bit about kind of where that's going in the future. But Dave, just from a pastoral perspective. Like, what is, and I know you know the Donelsons pretty well. They've spent some time with you.
1 month.
Like, what's your pastoral kind of thoughts, your view on the Donelsons story?
Well, it really two extreme, or the extremes of a spectrum kind of hit me. One of them, it breaks my heart because I've seen the pain that they walk through, and I've seen the hurt that they've experienced, and I just want to prevent that in as many ways as possible. And I think there are a lot of ways that can be, prevented if we catch folks early enough, and we do have expressed vulnerability, and we know how to do that. And then the other one is incredible joy to know that God doesn't give up on people. We may give up on people, and we may give up on God, but He doesn't quit. And what a difference a day make. So from a pastor's view or a pastoral view, I just am encouraged by the fact that these two people fought through. As a matter of fact, Mark, when you were this time when I heard the video, I thought about Jesus in the garden. When Jesus was praying before He was crucified, He said, "Father, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done." That's kind of where you were. But then it struck me that Jesus, when He was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, was going to suffer for the sins that Mark and Courtney and John and I and you have done. He didn't have anything that He had to, fear from that side of it, but He submitted to the will of God. And I believe as Mark submitted to the will of God, as Courtney, as you submitted to the will of God, it was hard. It was not comfortable, but the path that it led them on led to an abundance in a relationship that they hadn't experienced before. And I guess that's what I would say to kind of, because God and Jesus promised that we could have an abundant life. And I don't believe He means that has anything to do with how much money we make or whatever it may. I don't know. But I do know that it means that we can have abundant relationships and we can understand His love and then give that love away and have the kind of marriage or single people, friendships and relationships that the world is starving to death to get, that only come through Jesus Christ.
All right, so good. All right, so I'm gonna throw you a softball and get you warmed up here. So we have a lot of married people in the audience. So one question, and try to go under 45 minutes.
Okay, I'll try.
When is marriage worth fighting for?
That's a softball. Marriage is always worth fighting for. And I mentioned it a minute ago that you never know what another day can bring, because in the story for Carol and me, it was a pivotal day on the way home from the office one day when I was considering driving away. For my family. And on that day, I pulled over to the side of the road because I couldn't drive anymore. It was dangerous because I was crying. And I pulled over and I said, God, I need you to do one of two things. I need you to take me or change me, and I don't care which. I don't want to do to my family what I've watched other folks do in divorce and leaving their kids. And I had just watched two of my buddies leave their families, both of them men in ministry, and I couldn't understand how they got there, and now I was beginning to understand how they got there. But I didn't know what to do. because of that prayer and because of God's answer to prayer, the difference that day made has been another 22 years of marriage that is actually abundant. And I don't have to tell you that, but you could ask Carol if she were here. We love each other. We like each other. And it all came as a result of continuing to grab hold of the grace that God offered and not let go, because he wasn't going to let go of us.
Awesome. All right. So Mark and Courtney, I know that in the video when we talked about kind of this marriage in crisis and kind of this 9-day stretch, but like what kind of work did you guys have to do? What kind of support systems did you guys have as you were kind of working from crisis to where you are
now? There were a really awful 9 days, but that's not the sum of the redemption story. It's taken, it took months, years. In fact, we're going into year 5, and it's still a work in progress. We don't want to sit up here and paint a pretty picture and slap a red bow on it and say Happy Valentine's Day, because there's always work to be done, and we're moving forward, and that's the most important thing. We're learning and we're growing, and we're better now than before, but there's still room to grow.
Awesome. So one of the things I was thinking about Mark when I was listening to this story is, we start with Mark. He's like, I was in young life. I was like a Christ follower, doing the best I can. And then we see kind of this subtle kind of journey to like a double life and trying to protect this persona of being a Christ follower at the same time, like kind of living a lie, basically, in this huge secret. And so, so I was thinking about like what kind of accountability did you have during that period? How did that have any kind of impact on kind of this journey?
There was probably plenty of accountability available if I wanted to take advantage of it, but I didn't, because if I would have asked for accountability, I would have had to let people know that, hey, it's something you hold me accountable. And I wasn't ready to do that. Court wasn't the only one who didn't know about this double life that I was living. Nobody did. And to ask for someone to hold me accountable to stop doing this stuff, I would have had to let them know about it. And that was not even in my mindset that I think I would ever did. Because it would have broken that reputation, that persona that I had built up. And that persona that I believed that actually what I was, this other stuff was not really me. So why need accountability for it?
So, Dave, kind of walk us through, what is the importance, in terms of safeguarding our marriage of, deep relationships and accountability and how that kind of helps safeguard kind of what we have?
Okay. First of all, I really don't mean this as a kind of a blanket sweep, but I guess it is. There are very few of us that grow up in homes or that have the kind of training or the mentoring or the examples of what vulnerability, real healthy vulnerability is. The Holy Spirit, through the Apostle Paul, made it pretty clear in Ephesians 4:15 that we're to grow up into Christ. And one of those qualities of growing up into Christ is learning to speak the truth in love. And when you've got a relationship where you can actually speak the truth to somebody, honestly, tell them what's going on, down deep, and love them and know that you're going to be loved by them, that is rare, but we don't want it to be rare anymore. We want to see in every family a husband and wife. If there's a husband and wife still there, we'd love to see the husband and wife be able to speak truth to each other in a loving way, in a respectful way, and illustrate that to their children to show what it means to resolve conflict. But the vulnerability that we've seen lacking in our culture, I believe, and I think it's borne out pretty with great evidence, and that started really with a lot of people in generations past not being able to do that either. And it's not that it's not in the Scripture; it's in the Scripture, but it's really easy to kind of live your life, if you will. Kind of one of the ways that John, you and I talked about it is that we operate on a kind of a concentric circle basis. If you just picture this target, with number one circle in the middle is loving God. And then loving your spouse if you're married. If you're single, it'd be like loving your family. And then circle 3 would be if you have kids, loving your kids. Circle 4 would be loving the folks in the church, because we're supposed to have, great fellowship with the family of faith. And then outside would be also loving those people outside the church. And then what we've seen and what we've seen even taught in seminaries and Bible colleges and so forth, is that a lot of even leaders, pastoral leaders, have started in the middle of trying to understand what it means to love God, but loving your spouse or your family or your kids was sort of, you were like expected to know how to do that, and so it jumped into training you how to go out and lead a church and then win the lost. Well, when those lost people came to church, what they discovered over these decades, probably the last 100 years, I'm not quite that old, but I read books. But what people have found is that when they've come to church, they haven't found authenticity. They've heard people talk about loving God and loving each other, and those scriptures about husbands love your wife like Christ loved the church. But it's been hard to find anybody that's actually doing it that would actually communicate that in a vulnerable way. So we'd like to tear that paradigm down and go back to kind of reboot it to its original code, if you will, where God said, no, it's all about, Jesus made it really clear that the greatest commandment is still love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. There's a whole lot there. And then love your near ones, your neighbor as yourself. And we believe that near one is, these are near ones right here. And I have a wife who's my near one, and then I have 3 kids, 7 grandkids. Do we have pictures of the grandkids? No, we don't. I'm sorry. I should have brought those. But to be authentic, it's to love those people on those inner circles on my way to loving the church, on my way to loving the lost, and not forget that.
Yeah, so we're finding out vulnerability really matters. Having relationships that kind of hold you accountable really matters. I know for the last year or so, we've been kind of investing in kind of a new strategy. And honestly, when we talk about vulnerability and relationships and mentoring, we're really talking about discipleship. I know it's kind of a big word, it's a churchy word, but that's what that is. And so for the last year or so, we've been kind of working through kind of developing this idea of missional families and something we call huddles, where there's 4 or 5 people who get in each other's business, and it's hard. But we think this is where growth is. This is where we become better Christ followers. We say, follow me as I follow Christ. That is a heavy burden, but one we must bear. And so if you want to know more about huddles or missional families, what we're doing around here to kind of create better vulnerability, better growth, go to taketherisk.com or Peggy. A lot of you know Peggy. You can talk to her. She'd love to talk to you about that 4 hours. But we love how passionate she is about that. But also, so I want to go to a couple moments, and you guys, Mark and Courtney both, you had kind of really 2, I think, really powerful moments. And we ask 2 questions here a lot. 2 questions we think that every community should ask, that we should ask as a church, and we should ask as people. And it's, what is God saying to you, and what are you doing about it, right? So what is God saying? So Mark had this moment where, God said, you got to tell her. And then Mark has his choice. What are you going to do about it? Because that's your choice, right? That's on you. So God is speaking to you in crisis, and in that moment, you choose whether to obey or not. And sometimes it's hard, but you have to trust that God is big enough. So Mark, in your moment, in your God moment, God is speaking to you. What are you going to do about it? Kind of walk us through what that was like.
Yeah, so I heard that message on, I was doing it out in vacuum, so I heard it on the out, and on the whole way back, I just thought, all right, if I'm going to tell her, how can I tell her in a way that I'm still going to be okay, that I'm still going to be looking like a good guy, and so basically I had set it up in my mind that I will admit to what she thinks that she already suspected, that it was an emotional thing. If I come clean on that, then I come clean, I listen to God, I've done what I'm supposed to do, and hopefully, Court will look at me and say, wow, that was really brave, he's going to stand up dying, he's admitting to what he's done. What I learned looking back is, we hear that God will use whatever you can bring to the table. You don't have to be perfect, but offer what you can. So much more than you can imagine. And at the moment, at that time, that's all I could bring myself to do was to admit to something that she already knew happening. And God just took it from there and said, I'm going to take that one step that I've been waiting to get paid for 15 years and pull you along, kicking and screaming, and turn it into being on the stage 4.5 years later, talking about it. People, but it's really very complicated.
Courtney, you also had, a similar moment, where you're day 3 of day 9. And I think we know the stats. I think a lot of people are walking out at that point, right? And we know the stats. And so, but you get a message that may be countercultural, that may be unexpected, and God says, don't leave yet. Kind of walk us through, how you respond to that kind of moment.
Yeah, like you said, I was raised to be independent and to look out for myself and to take care of myself and not to let anyone walk all over me. And so in those moments, that was exactly what I felt like. I felt like I needed to stand up for myself and kick them out, and that was what everything inside me was screaming. But in my bed that night, I had opened my Bible and I had said, God, what do I do with this? I was at rock bottom. And that's when I felt like he said, don't leave yet. And what's so significant about that is I was in panic mode. I mean, I was sobbing. I was terrified. I was just angry. I was a whole host of emotions. That voice was none of those. That voice was, I've heard the term self-authenticating. There was power, but it was a request. It was an ask. It was not a demand. It was not like God said, you stay. It was, don't leave yet. And when I realized that I was listening to a God that I could trust, that was kind of my defining moment. I just learned that I couldn't trust the man that I thought I could. I had put Mark on a pedestal all those years and thought he could do no wrong. And, well, that was obviously wrong. And so when there was a God telling me, don't leave yet, all I had left was God, and I knew in that moment that I was going to choose to trust in the goodness of God, in his character, in the fact that he never changes, that he is perfect, and he is going to make this good. I didn't know what that looked like at the end. I had no idea we'd be sitting here together still happily married. In fact, I doubted it. But God, there's a hope that I think a lot of cultural norms would say, I hope for this, I hope for that. This was not a I hope our marriage works out moment. This was I'm putting my hope in a God who is good, and I'm going to trust him with everything I have, because that's all I had left.
Hashtag so good. All right. I've been stuck on that moment for last couple of days. I've been thinking about today and this idea of don't give up yet. And I've been thinking about all these times and some of you may be in crisis right now, right? Some of you may be in financial crisis or marriage crisis. We have no shortage of things to be in crisis about. But there may be crisis for you, and God might be saying, not yet. Not yet. We see this throughout the Bible, when we think about a crowd of people around a cross about 2,000 years ago saying, I followed this guy for 3 years and I thought he was different. And I could almost see God saying, not yet. Not yet. Hope waits. And so when you're in these crises, I'm just going to ask you, would you do what Mark and Courtney have so, been such a great example of, and say, what are you saying to me, God? And it might be, not yet. Don't give up yet. I'm bigger than this. The power is beyond you. This is not about you and what you can do. It's what I can do. And so, not yet. This is what we need here. When God speaks to us, how are we going to respond? The choices we make the difference in terms of, how we follow Christ and who we are in that power. So, Dave, any kind of final thoughts around this story? Just from a pastor, from a guy who's seen a lot of crises in marriage, from varying degrees. What would you say to us? There's a lot of married people in here, people who are going to get married, people who want to get married, Ian, very desperately. So, what would you say to us about how do we safeguard our marriage, better?
Although, again, that's not softball nor an easy answer. I think the answer is pretty simple, but the fulfilling of that is not really easy because there's an enemy out there that hates your guts, and he hates your marriage, and he hates your kids, and he'll tear it apart if we don't know how to combat him. But I think there is a central point, and that is that when you and I honestly know how loved we are by our Heavenly Father. The God of the universe knows your name, and he knows everything about you and about me, and he loves us desperately. And there's a scripture in 1 John 4, verse 18, I believe, that says, we love because he first loved us. You know, in Courtney and Mark's story, the love that they had for each other was a great love to start with. But the love they have for each other now, and we didn't talk about this, but I just know it's true because I've been observing in this long time that we've known each other for 2 months. But I have observed something, and even at the retreat that we went on, I watched them because after I saw the video, another video, and then I saw them interact with each other, I saw them having fun together, I saw them laughing with each other, and I believe that where they are now is better than where they started even when they first married. Again, I'm just a guess, because there's truth at the basis of it. The foundation is not a lie. The foundation is not, well, we're going to keep up a persona. The foundation is no, Courtney knows she's loved by her Heavenly Father. She ran into that truth. Mark had to come to grips with God's big enough. He really loves me, and he's got my best interest, even though it may not be comfortable or easy. Carol and I, that was the pivotal point for both of us that changed our marriage 21 years ago, and it continues to change us today. And that is when you know how loved you are. And there are a lot of forces maybe that have fought against your knowing. You may have come from a family where God's love was not shown to you or to your parents, and you may not know what love looks like. But I promise you, Jesus will reveal it. When he went to the cross, he did it because he loves you. He knows all the stuff we were going to do, and he loves us still, and he went to the cross anyway. And so he died, and he offers forgiveness for us, you know, through that death and resurrection so that we can go to heaven, but not just to go to heaven, but that's going to be abundant there, but he wants us to have abundant life here, and he promised we could have it. And the last thing I would say is every now and then when I'm working with couples, I'll put out what I call an effort scale, and I'll put 0 on this end and 100% on that end. And I'll just ask them this question. So when you were getting ready for your job or your profession, and you had to go to school and put money in it and all that stuff, how much effort would you say you put into that? And they'll go, oh man, like 90% or 100% or maybe 110%, you know, they'll go off the scale over here. And then I'll ask the question, so when you were getting married, how much effort did you put into being the godly husband or the best husband you could be? To being a godly wife? How much effort did you put? Well, you know, it gets really quiet in the room. Crickets start, you know, talking to each other. And it gets really quiet because most of us don't know how to make that effort. My encouragement to you would be, not just to you, but for me, to invest wisely and well and deeply and pursue loving your spouse, loving your kids, as Jesus loved his church and as Jesus told us that we could. He says, a new commandment I give you, that you love one another, even as I have loved you. This is how they'll know you're my disciples, he said, by the way you love one another. And so by the grace of God, Mark and Courtney, Carol and I are going to pursue loving God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving each other as we love ourselves. And communicate that to our kids and to our grandkids, to the church, because the world is desperately looking for authentic love, and Jesus has it and gives it.
Awesome. We'll give these guys one more hand. So a couple things I want to tell you about. One, you can find out more about Dave and what he's doing at thebasicidea.org. A lot of great resources there. You won't regret it. It's just so good. This is really good resources there. Also, if you want to know more about the Donelsons story, Courtney has wrote a book called Clay Jar Cracked. I just got my copy. So if you want to hear more about that, there's a lot here that we couldn't cover in 16 minutes. It's a redeeming story. It's a story about God's love and Christ's power and all these things. And I know you're also getting this book over to, we're doing a GoFundMe for getting this book to LA Book Fair, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So we'll send you some links to that as well. Help Courtney out with that. And then Dave, would you just kind of wrap us up in prayer?
I'd be happy to. Father, what an honor to get to sit on a stage and talk about your love for us and about marriage and about, that's your idea. All the joy and all the incredible freedom, Father, that we can experience in a relationship with with our spouse. And then the idea, God, of your redemption and your forgiveness. And Father, thank you so much that when you forgave our sin, you didn't just keep bringing it back up and beating us with it. That, Father, you removed that sin as far as the east is from the west, to remember it no more. And so, Lord, I pray that in that type of love and freedom and forgiveness and mercy, that we would walk from this place today, people who know you and are known by you, people who love you and then we know that we're loved by you, and people, Father, that your love has set free to be exactly who you called us and designed us and gifted us to be, for your glory and for the good of this world. In Jesus' name, amen.